The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the morning air as Officer Karen Hutchins snapped them around Dr. Marcus Field's wrists. The rescued German Shepherd mix in the back of his van whimpered softly, sensing the tension that had erupted on the quiet residential street. "You're under arrest for suspected animal theft," she announced with cold authority, her voice cutting through the peaceful Saturday morning like a blade. Dr. Field stood perfectly still, his dark eyes meeting hers with a calm that seemed to unnerve the officer. "Ma'am, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Dr. Marcus Fields, director of the Riverside City Animal Shelter. These animals were rescued from an abandonment case on Maple Street." His voice remained steady, despite the absurdity of the situation unfolding around him. Karen's jaw tightened as she glanced at the van, filled with 3 dogs and 2 cats, all bearing the telltale signs of neglect. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England. You expect me to believe someone like you runs anything official in this city?" The words dripped with contempt as she tightened her grip on his arm. Just 30 minutes earlier, Dr. Fields had been having one of those perfect Saturday mornings that reminded him why he loved his work. The sun had painted golden streaks across the shelter's parking lot as he loaded the last of the rescue carriers into his van. Sarah Chen, his lead veterinary technician, had handed him the paperwork with a satisfied smile. 5 more lives saved. "Dr. Fields, that makes 37 this month." Marcus had smiled back, feeling that familiar warmth that came with each successful rescue. At 42, he had spent nearly 2 decades building the Riverside Shelter into a model facility that other cities studied and emulated. His gentle approach with both animals and people had earned him recognition throughout the state. But more importantly, it had saved thousands of lives. The Hendersons on Maple Street finally admitted they couldn't care for their pets anymore. Sarah had explained as they secured the carriers. Neighbors reported the animals had been without food for 3 days. The families going through some financial troubles. But they signed the surrender papers willingly once they understood we'd find good homes. Marcus had nodded, making mental notes about follow-up care for each animal. The German Shepherd mix would need dental work. The tabby cat required treatment for an ear infection, and the elderly beagle showed signs of arthritis that could be managed with proper medication. These weren't just animals to him. They were individuals with stories, personalities, and the right to live with dignity. The drive through the suburban neighborhood had been routine until he stopped at the traffic light on Oakwood Avenue. That's when Officer Hutchins had pulled up behind him, her patrol car's lights suddenly blazing. At first, Marcus had assumed she was responding to another call, but when she gestured for him to pull over, a familiar knot formed in his stomach. He had experienced this before. Not often, but enough times to recognize the pattern. Despite his position, his reputation, and his spotless record, there were still those who saw only his skin color and made their assumptions accordingly. Usually, a calm explanation and his identification resolved any confusion quickly. Today felt different. "Step out of the vehicle," Karen had commanded the moment he rolled down his window. Her hand rested on her service weapon, and her eyes held a hardness that spoke of prejudice masquerading as procedure. "Officer, I'm Dr. Marcus Fields from the City Animal Shelter. I have identification and all the proper documentation for these rescued animals." He had reached slowly for his wallet, moving deliberately to avoid any misinterpretation of his actions. But Karen had already made up her mind. "Don't reach for anything. Get out now. We've had reports of someone stealing pets from this neighborhood, and you match the description perfectly." The description, Marcus knew without asking, was likely nothing more than blackmail. He had climbed out of the van with his hands visible, his voice remaining calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Officer, If you'll just look at my identification, you'll see I'm the director of Riverside Animal Shelter. These animals were legally surrendered this morning." That's when she had produced the handcuffs. Now, standing on the sidewalk with his hands secured behind his back, Marcus watched as Karen began searching through his van. The rescued animals cowered in their carriers, their stress levels rising with each aggressive movement she made. The German Shepherd mix, whom Marcus had mentally named Hope, pressed herself against the back of her carrier and whined softly. "Please be gentle with them," Marcus said, his concern for the animals overriding his own predicament. "They've already been through significant trauma. The black and white cat has a heart murmur, and sudden stress could—" "I don't need a lecture from you about animals," Karen snapped, roughly moving one of the carriers. "If these are stolen pets, their real owners are probably worried sick." Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived across the street, had been watering her garden when the commotion began. Now she stood at her fence, her weathered hands gripping the wooden slats as she watched the scene unfold. "That's Dr. Fields," she called out to Karen. "He's been taking care of animals in this city longer than you've been wearing that badge. Young lady." Karen barely glanced in her direction. "Ma'am, please step back. This is official police business." "But, Mrs. Patterson's voice had carried, and other neighbors began emerging from their homes. Tom Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down, recognized Marcus immediately. His family's golden retriever had been treated at the shelter clinic just last month. "Officer, you're making a mistake. Dr. Fields is one of the most respected people in this community." The growing crowd seemed to agitate Karen further. She turned back to Marcus, her face flushed with anger and something that looked suspiciously like embarrassment. "I suppose you coached all these people to cover for you." Marcus felt a surge of frustration, but kept his voice level. "Officer Hutchins, I can see your nameplate. I'm asking you one more time to verify my identity before this situation escalates unnecessarily. In my back pocket, you'll find my wallet with my driver's license, my veterinary license, and my city identification card. In the glove compartment, there's a folder with all the documentation for today's animal rescue, including the signed surrender forms." For a moment, Karen hesitated. Something in Marcus's demeanor, his calm professionalism in the face of her hostility, seemed to give her pause. But then her radio crackled with another officer's voice asking for her status, and her defensive walls slammed back into place. "Turn around and put your hands on the van," she ordered. "I'm going to search you for weapons." The pat-down was unnecessarily rough, performed more for humiliation than safety. Marcus remained silent, knowing that any protest would only escalate the situation. Around them, the crowd of neighbors grew larger, their voices becoming more insistent. "This is ridiculous," called out Janet Morrison, a schoolteacher who lived at the end of the block. "Dr. Fields helped me adopt my rescue cat 2 years ago. He's dedicated his life to helping animals." Young Marcus Williams, a teenager who had volunteered at the shelter over the summer, pushed through the crowd with his phone raised. "I'm recording this," he announced. "Dr. Fields, are you okay?" Karen whirled around to face the boy. "Put that phone away immediately, or you'll be arrested too." "I have every right to record a public interaction with police," Marcus Williams replied, his voice shaking but determined. "This is America, not some police state." The standoff intensified as more neighbors arrived, drawn by the commotion and the growing number of voices. Among them was Rebecca Shaw, a local news reporter who happened to live just 3 blocks away. She had been enjoying a quiet Saturday morning when her neighbor called to tell her about the situation developing on Oakwood Avenue. Rebecca arrived to find Dr. Fields standing beside his van in handcuffs, while Officer Hutchins aggressively searched through the animal carriers. As a journalist, she had covered enough stories to recognize the dynamics at play, and, as a member of the community, she knew exactly who Dr. Marcus Fields was. "Officer, I'm Rebecca Shaw with Channel 7 News," she announced, producing her press credentials. "Can you explain why Dr. Fields, the director of our city animal shelter, is being detained?" Karen's face went pale. The presence of a news reporter changed everything, and she knew it. "This is an ongoing investigation. I can't comment at this time." "What investigation?" Rebecca pressed. "Dr. Fields is well known throughout the community for his animal rescue work. What evidence do you have that he's committed any crime?" Before Karen could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "What the hell is going on here?" City Manager Robert Chen approached the scene with quick, purposeful strides. He had been driving home from his morning golf game when he spotted the commotion and recognized Marcus's distinctive van. Robert Chen had worked closely with Dr. Fields for over 8 years, since Marcus had first proposed expanding the city's animal welfare programs. In that time, he had watched Marcus transform a struggling municipal shelter into a nationally recognized facility that had increased adoption rates by 400%, while reducing euthanasia to nearly zero. "Mr. Chen," Marcus said with visible relief, "there seems to be some confusion about my identity and the purpose of my work today." Robert's eyes took in the scene, his city's most respected veterinarian standing in handcuffs, while an officer searched through legally rescued animals as a crowd of angry neighbors looked on. His jaw tightened as the implications became clear. "Officer Hutchins, I'm Robert Chen, city manager. Dr. Fields is a city employee and the director of our animal shelter. These animals were rescued this morning as part of our official animal welfare program. I'm ordering you to remove those handcuffs immediately." Karen's hands trembled slightly as she faced the city manager. She had acted on assumption and prejudice, and now found herself confronted by the very people who could end her career. "Sir, I received reports of pet theft in this area, and I was investigating—" "What reports?" Robert demanded. "From whom, and why didn't you verify Dr. Fields' identity before arresting him?" The questions hung in the air unanswered because Karen had no reasonable responses. There had been no reports of pet theft. She had seen a black man loading animals into a van and had made assumptions based on nothing more than her own biases. Rebecca Shaw had been recording the entire exchange on her phone, and now she stepped forward. "Dr. Fields, would you be willing to speak on camera about what happened here today?" Marcus looked at the crowd of neighbors who had come to his defense, at the city manager, who had arrived just in time, and at the young man still recording everything. Then he looked at Officer Hutchins, whose career was likely over, and felt a surge of sadness rather than anger. "Officer Hutchins, I need you to remove these handcuffs," he said quietly. "Not because your superior ordered it, but because it's the right thing to do. Then I need you to help me check on these animals, because they're scared and they need care, not conflict." The simplicity and grace of his response seemed to break something inside Karen. Her hands shook as she unlocked the handcuffs, and for the first time since the encounter began, her voice lost its harsh edge. I made a mistake." "Yes, you did," Marcus replied, rubbing his wrists where the metal had chafed. "But mistakes can be learning opportunities if we let them be." He moved immediately to the van, checking on each of the rescued animals. Hope, the German Shepherd mix, had been panting heavily from stress, but she calmed slightly when Marcus spoke to her in the gentle voice she had begun to trust. The elderly beagle, whom Marcus called Wisdom, had curled into a tight ball in the corner of his carrier. but his tail gave a tentative wag when Marcus's familiar scent reached him. "These animals have been through enough trauma for one day," Marcus told the assembled crowd. "I need to get them back to the shelter where they can receive proper care." Rebecca kept her camera rolling as she conducted an impromptu interview. "Dr. Fields, can you tell our viewers what happened here today?" Marcus considered his words carefully. He could have been angry, could have demanded justice, could have used this moment to highlight the racial profiling that had occurred. Instead, he chose a different path. "Today, I was doing my job, which is rescuing animals who need help. Officer Hutchins made an error in judgment, but errors can be corrected. What matters more is that this community came together to stand up for what's right. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Rodriguez, young Marcus Williams, all of you saw an injustice and spoke up. That's what makes a community strong." But even as Marcus chose grace over grievance, the incident was far from over. Rebecca's recording had been streamed live on the Channel 7 News Facebook page, and, within minutes, it had been shared hundreds of times. The hashtag Justice for Dr. Fields began trending locally as people expressed their outrage at what they had witnessed. City Manager Chen pulled Officer Hutchins aside for a private conversation that left her pale and shaken. The words, "administrative leave," "internal investigation," and "possible termination" floated on the morning breeze as neighbors began to disperse, though many lingered to speak with Dr. Fields personally. Mrs. Patterson approached him with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Fields, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You saved my cat Whiskers 3 years ago when she was hit by a car. I'll never forget your kindness." Tom Rodriguez clasped Marcus's shoulder. "My kids think you're a hero, Doc. They're going to be devastated when they hear about this. But they'll also be proud of how you handled it." Young Marcus Williams finally lowered his phone. "Dr. Fields, my video already has over 1,000 views. People are really angry about what that cop did." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Anger can be useful if it leads to positive change, Marcus, but don't let it consume you. Channel it into action that makes things better." As the crowd finally began to thin, Rebecca conducted a final interview with City Manager Chen. What consequences will Officer Hutchins face for this incident? Robert's expression was grim. "There will be a full internal investigation, and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. This kind of behavior has no place in our police department or our community." The story aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news, and, by Sunday morning, it had been picked up by national outlets. The footage of Dr. Fields being handcuffed while trying to rescue animals struck a chord with viewers across the country. The contrast between his dignity in the face of injustice and Officer Hutchins' aggressive behavior made for compelling television. But Marcus didn't watch the coverage. Instead, he spent Sunday at the shelter, caring for Hope, Wisdom, and the other rescued animals. The German Shepherd mix had begun to show her true personality, playful and affectionate, despite her rough start in life. The elderly beagle revealed himself to be a gentle soul who loved nothing more than having his ears scratched. The cats, initially skittish, began to purr when Marcus spoke to them. Sarah Chen found him in the dog runs late Sunday afternoon, sitting on a bench while Hope rested her head on his knee. "You know you're famous now, right? The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Animal rescue organizations from across the country want to honor you. 3 different publishers want to discuss book deals." Marcus smiled, continuing to stroke Hope's fur. "What I want is for this girl to find a family who'll love her, for Wisdom to spend his golden years in comfort, and for people to remember that our job is taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. The City Council wants to honor you at Tuesday night's meeting," Sarah continued. They're also discussing new policies for police interactions and community relations. Good, Marcus replied. Maybe something positive will come from all this after all. Tuesday evening brought the largest city council meeting in Riverside's history. The chambers were packed with residents, many holding signs supporting Dr. Fields and calling for police reform. News cameras lined the back wall, and reporters from 3 states had traveled to cover the story. Marcus entered the chamber to a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. He had never been comfortable with attention, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes. But he understood that sometimes individual stories could spark broader change. Mayor Patricia Williams approached the podium with a proclamation that had been hastily prepared. Dr. Marcus Fields, for 16 years you have served this community with distinction, compassion, and unwavering dedication to the welfare of animals and the people who love them. Your work has saved countless lives and inspired a new generation of animal welfare advocates. The proclamation declared October 15th as Dr. Marcus Fields Day in Riverside. But the more significant announcements came from Police Chief David Martinez. Officer Karen Hutchins had been terminated, effective immediately. New training protocols would be implemented for all officers, focusing on implicit bias, community relations, and proper procedures for citizen interactions. What happened to Dr. Fields should never happen to anyone in our community. Chief Martinez stated, "We have failed in our duty to serve and protect all citizens equally, and we must do better." When Marcus finally took the podium, the room fell silent. He looked out at the faces before him, neighbors who had stood up for him, city officials grappling with difficult questions, and reporters documenting a story that had touched people far beyond Riverside's borders. 2 days ago, I experienced something that many people in our community face regularly, but that rarely makes the news. I was judged not by my character, my actions, or my contributions, but by the color of my skin. That judgment led to my arrest while I was doing a job I love, caring for animals who needed help. He paused, his eyes finding Mrs. Patterson in the front row, Tom Rodriguez standing near the back, and young Marcus Williams recording from the side aisle. But something else happened that day. A community came together. Neighbors who barely knew each other stood up for what was right. A teenager with a phone showed that individual actions can spark change. A city manager demonstrated that leadership means taking responsibility for making things better. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued, "Officer Hutchins made a terrible mistake, and she's facing the consequences of that choice. But her mistake became our opportunity. An opportunity to examine our biases, to strengthen our community bonds, and to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to others." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus raised his hand for quiet. "I want to tell you about Hope. That's what I named the German Shepherd mix, who was in my van on Saturday. She had been neglected, abandoned, and was terrified when we rescued her. But with patience, care, and love, she's beginning to trust again. Yesterday, a family from across town came to meet her. They fell in love immediately, and Hope will go to her forever home next week." He smiled, and the warmth of it seemed to fill the entire chamber. Hope's story reminds us that healing is possible, that trust can be rebuilt, and that tomorrow can be better than today. That's what I choose to focus on. Not the handcuffs or the humiliation, but the community that rallied around me and the changes we can make together. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, many stopped to speak with Marcus personally. Children asked for autographs, teenagers thanked him for his example of grace under pressure, and adults shared their own stories of discrimination and resilience. Rebecca Shaw approached him near the end of the evening. "Dr. Fields, My producer wants to know if you'd consider a follow-up interview. This story has really resonated with people. Marcus considered the request. Only if we can do it at the shelter. I want people to see the work we do, the animals we save. If my story helps more pets find homes, then something good will have come from that awful Saturday morning. 3 weeks later, Hope trotted happily around her new backyard, while her adoptive family threw tennis balls and marveled at her playful spirit. Wisdom had found a quiet home with an elderly couple who appreciated his gentle nature and didn't mind that he moved a little slower than younger dogs. The rescued cats had all found families as well. Their stories shared widely after the incident brought national attention to the shelter's work. The policy changes implemented after Marcus's arrest became a model for other cities. Officer training programs now included mandatory courses on implicit bias and community engagement. A citizen review board was established to investigate complaints of police misconduct. Most importantly, the incident had sparked community conversations about race, justice, and the kind of society people wanted to build together. Marcus returned to his quiet routine of caring for animals and running the shelter. But he remained available for speaking engagements and interviews when they could advance the cause of animal welfare or social justice. The book deal materialized, and he donated all proceeds to expand the shelter's low-cost veterinary clinic that served families who might otherwise be unable to afford medical care for their pets. On a quiet Thursday morning, exactly 1 month after his arrest, Marcus was in his office reviewing adoption applications when Sarah knocked on his door. "Dr. Fields, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." Marcus looked up to find Karen Hutchins standing in his doorway. She was dressed in civilian clothes, her former confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. "Dr. Fields, I wondered if I could speak with you for a few minutes." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Of course. Please, sit down." Karen perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know I have no right to be here. No right to ask anything of you after what I did. But I needed to apologize properly. Not just the weak words I mumbled that day." Marcus waited, sensing she had more to say. "I was wrong," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just wrong about you specifically, but wrong in my thinking, my assumptions, my whole approach to policing. I let fear and prejudice guide my actions, and I hurt an innocent man who dedicates his life to helping others." She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since I was fired. About why I became a police officer. About the kind of person I want to be. I'm starting therapy to work on my biases. I'm volunteering with community organizations. I'm trying to become someone who builds bridges instead of tearing them down." Marcus studied her face, seeing genuine remorse and the beginning of self-awareness. "Thank you for coming here. Karen, it takes courage to admit when we're wrong, and even more courage to work on changing ourselves." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quickly. "I know the damage I did goes beyond just that one day, but I wanted you to know that your response, your grace in that situation, has changed me. You could have destroyed me completely, and you would have been justified. Instead, you chose compassion." Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking of Hope playing in her new backyard, of Wisdom curled up by a fireplace, of all the animals who had found love because his story had brought attention to their needs. "Karen, forgiveness isn't about whether someone deserves it. It's about freeing ourselves from the burden of anger and creating space for growth and healing." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "There's an organization called Communities United that works on police-community relations. They're always looking for people with law enforcement experience who want to help build better relationships. If you're serious about making amends, your insight could help prevent other incidents like ours. Karen took the card with trembling hands. You would recommend me after everything? I would recommend someone who has learned from their mistakes and wants to do better. Marcus replied. The question is whether that person is you. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. Dr. Fields, I know this doesn't undo what happened, but I want you to know that watching you handle that situation with such dignity was one of the most powerful lessons I've ever received. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. After she left, Marcus sat quietly in his office, thinking about the strange journey that had brought them both to this moment. Through his window, he could see the shelter's dog runs where several of their current residents were playing. A new arrival, a senior beagle mix named Grace, was slowly learning to trust again after being surrendered when her elderly owner could no longer care for her. Sarah appeared in his doorway again. The Johnson family is here for their final adoption visit with Luna, and Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up story about how adoption rates have increased since the incident. Marcus smiled, returning his attention to the present moment and the work that gave his life meaning. Let's go help Luna find her forever home. And yes, we can do the interview. Every story we tell might help another animal find love. As he walked toward the adoption room, where a family was about to welcome a new member, Marcus reflected on the unexpected paths that had led to this moment. A single morning's injustice had sparked conversations, changed policies, and ultimately created more opportunities for healing and growth than anyone could have predicted. The handcuffs had lasted only minutes, but the bonds forged by a community's response to injustice would endure for years. Hope had found her home. Wisdom had found peace. And Marcus had discovered that sometimes our greatest challenges become our most powerful opportunities to create positive change. In the adoption room, Luna wagged her tail as the Johnson children knelt down to greet her properly. Mrs. Johnson had tears in her eyes as she watched her family fall in love with their new pet. Dr. Fields, we heard about you on the news. We've been thinking about adopting for months, but your story inspired us to finally come in. Marcus knelt down beside Luna, scratching behind her ears as she pressed against his leg one last time before going to her new life. Every animal deserves a family who will love them. Mrs. Johnson, Luna is lucky to have found you. As the family completed their paperwork and prepared to take Luna home, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction that came with each successful adoption. But today, it was tinged with something deeper, the knowledge that his willingness to respond to injustice with grace, rather than rage, had created ripples of positive change that extended far beyond the walls of the shelter. The sun was setting as Marcus made his final rounds of the day, checking on each animal in his care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rescues, new opportunities to make a difference. And somewhere across town, Hope was probably curled up on a couch with her new family, dreaming peaceful dreams in the safety of a loving home. It had been a long journey from that shocking Saturday morning arrest to this moment of quiet satisfaction. But as Marcus turned off the shelter lights and headed home, he carried with him the profound understanding that sometimes our darkest moments can illuminate the path toward our brightest possibilities. The handcuffs had been removed in minutes, but the hope they had unexpectedly generated would last a lifetime.